Deep breath. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
So good. It's always so good the second time. When Dubs Weinblatt, our new Tzedek Initiative manager, first started SAJ, I sent them nearly immediately to meet with Ruth Messenger, right over there, to ask Ruth what they should be doing at the beginning of their time. And Ruth said, as she says often, ICE and the National Guard are going to be coming to New York City at some point, and we are going to need to learn how to mobilize. So go and research what we can learn from what was happening in Chicago. That was back in the fall. So through a web of connections, Dubs connected with a local Chicago organizer who told them about the whistles, the whistle that I have right here, which has become a near universal tool for activists and local upstanders to alert when ICE is in a neighborhood. With one long blow, you communicate that ICE is nearby. With 3 short staccato blows, almost like the shofar, you indicate that ICE is doing an immigration raid. Not right now, thankfully. Not that we know of. Since, along with all the work and training that SOJAC is doing to help us prepare, we have been giving out these whistles, and some of you may have received them over the past couple of months, and inviting everyone in our community to take them and just have them handy with them in case they see anything. We've also talked to the Coalition of Synagogues that works on immigration and refugee rights to help them, and synagogues across New York City are doing the same thing that we have started. Whistles like these have alerted families to stay inside, keeping them out of detention centers. Whistles like these have helped mobilize communities when someone is taken. It was a whistle just like this that Renee Nicole Good used when her and her wife saw ICE in their neighborhood, just minutes after dropping their 6-year-old off at school. In the words of Renee's wife, Rebecca, we had whistles, they had guns. And I imagine, like many of us, are deeply shocked or grieving this loss of a mother, a poet, an ordinary, extraordinary person who simply wanted to protect her neighbors. And as all stages of grief go, I want to say that I am so angry. And I hope that we are all angry.
Yes.
Now, I want to say, even if you have a different read on the various videos that have been released, and you maybe believe that she could have done something different, that she should have maybe gotten out of her car or not driven away, or whatever it is, and I want to acknowledge that people have different interpretations, I hope we can all agree that the models of the basic standards of law enforcement would plainly help us realize the truth that Renee Good should be alive today. There were so many other choices that could have been made in that moment. And her 3 children, 15, 12, and 6 years old, should not be wanting for their mother. Her wife should not be burying her beloved. Full stop. I am so angry that ICE agents with virtually no training and a bloated budget for military-grade equipment are sent into cities like ours to both justify external distorted narratives about the dangers of immigrants, AKA people of color, pose for the rest of us. And I am angry that when these agents come, they are there to create a climate of chaos and fear so that ordinary citizens like us feel it is too dangerous to stand up and do something, hoping that if we comply, put our whistles down, and close our eyes, we will just wait it out. And I am sad that that can work. Because after Renee's killing, after this shooting, I thought of myself and I thought of my kids and I thought of my desire for self-preservation, which is natural and understandable. And I started to reevaluate my own risks and what I was willing to do now that death and life are on the table as an upstander. It's not new, but this is bringing it into crystal clarity. And I can imagine that many others experienced similar fears, and there's no shame in those fears. And the tragedy of Renee's shooting stirs in me and brings to the forefront the righteous anger and still somehow shock of what is happening in our country today. Racial profiling, stories of people following around Uber drivers, delivery drivers, whether or not they are immigrants or citizens, whether or not they are legal or not, because they simply look Mexican or African. The citizens who have gotten arrested and detained because of that profiling, citizens sometimes detained for days. And the fact that the dehumanization of migrants has escalated to cruel tactics that make our immigrant neighbors scared to leave their houses, send their kids to school, or even go to their places of worship now. So, now's the question. What do we do? How do we move forward? How do we navigate what is happening and what has happened just this week to bring it to a different reality for us? As Jews, we turn always to the Torah for guidance. And reading Parshat Shemot at this moment feels kind of basher, meant to be, because in it, Torah is mirroring life, and life is mirroring Torah. And I hope in it we can find some solace and some guidance. So I want to speak to that mirroring. And we didn't read chapter 1, and so a lot of what I'm drawing on is at the end of chapter 1, but I think you'll know the story. In the Torah, we see the universality of evil. That even before we become an Israelite nation, there are evil rulers, pharaohs who choose not to see or know Joseph, not to know the past, who choose an alternative reality and wish to harm either because they are themselves wicked or because they seek power, or both. And we see in quite an eerily familiar way that evil, according to the Torah, has a playbook. And this is the playbook. Number 1, dehumanize. By the time the Israelites are described as a group early in this week's Parsha, the word yishritzu is used to describe them, which means, it really harkens back to the creepy, crawly bugs of creation. So the Israelites have been made to seem by the society around them as if they are not human beings, as if they are not anything but vermin. Not worthy of dignity, not worthy of life. Playbook number 2, manipulate fear. Pharaoh says to the people, Let us deal shrewdly with them so that they may not increase, harking on those narratives. Otherwise, in the event of war, they might join our enemies and fighting against us and rise from the ground. There is no evidence the Israelites are going to join their enemies, but manipulation of fear is right there in the text. Number 3, enlist people in your mission and escalate your tactics. What does Pharaoh do? First, he sets up taskmasters. Then he realizes slavery is not enough, so he calls on the midwives to kill the baby boys. And then when they do not comply, he speaks to the entire people and says, every boy that is born you shall throw into the Nile, and let every girl live. He charged the entire Egyptian people with the task of eradicating their neighbors. So we can imagine Egyptian militias that manifest in this moment of fear. I mean, I don't think we have to imagine, they're really in the text. This is eerily familiar. And in the words of another great Jewish writer, there is nothing new under the sun. Evil is universal, it happens. People want power, people are wicked, and there is a playbook for evil. And the Torah gives us another parallel, another way of seeing into this situation. A reminder of what we can do to confront that kind of evil. Enter the Hebrew midwives, which are, it's not clear if they are the midwives to the Hebrews or the Hebrew midwives themselves. They have a very short window in the Torah, very small amount of pen and paper on the midwives, yet their impact is well beyond. It says the midwives, fearing God, did not do as the king of Egypt told them, and they let the boys live. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs speaks of the midwives in such a high manner, and he says that this is the first recorded instance in history of civil disobedience. Refusing to obey an order given by the most powerful man in the most powerful empire in the ancient world, in his words, simply because it was immoral, unethical, and inhuman. And then he goes on to say, Shifra and Puah, who are the midwives, are two of the greatest heroines in world literature. Not just the Torah, world literature. The first to teach humanity the moral limits of power. And I think it's important to note that the midwives were only temporarily successful. Maybe they saved a handful of babies. But then Pharaoh escalated the tactics. But that's not the point. What they did mattered, and what they did was a model. And the midwives should be and can be a model for us today to be upstanders, to recognize when the law of the land is not ethical, when we have to stand up. And in this moment, in the spirit of what I was talking about earlier, we have to acknowledge that there's a significant difference between the midwives and ordinary citizens today. Because the midwives defied the most powerful man in the world, and then the text says God did well with them. And their people, their descendants, multiplied and increased, and God made them households, batim, because they feared God. And this is the time where I think we have to be honest. The midwives had an advantage. They had God who could protect them. They could stand up and do the most chutzpahdik thing in the world, and they were protected because, at least according to the story, God intervened. And we don't have this kind of physical protection. We don't even have necessarily that kind of we don't have the kind of assurance. I don't know they had it ahead of time, but still that they had it. We live in a real world where people could be beaten, arrested, and killed for being upstanders like the midwives. So what do? That's the general question here. But I want to offer a teaching on the midwives and on these houses. They established houses, batim. It's an interesting and odd phrase. And there are many, many, many rabbinic commentators and commentaries that try to play out what this means, this houses. What does that actually mean? And I just want to highlight one for today, which I think can speak to us in this moment. It's a teaching by the Degel Machane Ephraim, a late 18th century Hasidic master, who taught that the batim were actually created by their yirat Hashem, their awe and fear of God. So their awe and fear of God were their houses. Nothing physical happened to them. They didn't get riches. They didn't get, millions of dollars. They simply had the knowledge of that they were carrying that fear of God. The way I would say that is that their faith is what sustained them, and their faith is what carried them. And I understand this to mean that it is not going to be God that builds us our own houses of protection, but we are going to have to find our own boundaries, our own convictions worth fighting for, and we're going to have to listen to our inner voices, just like the midwives did, guiding us to do what is right. And I believe very much that it is not only okay, but necessary to feel anger, to feel fear, but most importantly, not to stay in it, not to get stuck there. Because all we have and what we can return to are those batim, those houses of faith, our convictions, our beliefs, what carries us through. So here we are. As Ruth has been calling out to us for months, ICE will likely come to New York City in due time. And even if not, we have friends and neighbors and other places. And so these are important questions to ask each other and ourselves. What are our batim? What are our convictions? What is our yirat Hashem? How can we be like the midwives, but to know our boundaries and what we can do? And now in this uncertain moment, in this frightening time when so much is out of control, I want to invite us to just do that, to keep building our houses, to keep building our sense of conviction, of right and wrong, of faith, even in the midst of those who want to shake our fear out of, shake us with fear. And for us to understand and to see for ourselves what we can do in our own way to stand up to the evil that we see in this world. Shabbat Shalom.